Okay, welcome back. We are now starting with the first of our upcoming discussion sessions. First up is Marc Haber with the talk about what ways of network configuration are available in Debian currently. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm going to tell you about the state of the network today. This is kind of going to be a this glass is empty talk because the glass is kind of empty. I found myself on the program as right in the middle of talk, so I prepared a this is not a talk slide. I think this should be like a BOF. I have a few slides prepared, what we have, what we want to do. And then I would like you to discuss. I think I will be talking like 10 minutes, and then we have half an hour to discuss, so be prepared. I already said I'm the guy who says this glass is empty or half empty, and I would like to take on Holger's call of I still haven't found what I'm looking for. It's your job to refill my glass. I would like to tell you where we are going and how do we get there. It's your job. I'm Marc Haber. I'm Diplom-Informatiker. In Debian and almost everywhere else I go by Zugschluss, which is this railroad sign at the back of the train. Ich bin ein Hamburger Jung. I grew up here, but I'm in Heidelberg and Baden-Württemberg for more than 30 years now. So this is kind of a home game for me, but not quite. I work as an independent IT consultant. I'm 54 years old. I'm married. I have 4 cats, and I've been using Debian since 1998. And back then, it was custom to become ADD pretty fast. So I got my key added to the ring in 2001. I do Linux and networking in data centers, cars, homes. And I usually do everything that's neither Microsoft nor Apple. And I would like in the future to work more with Debian. So I'm for hire, not for hire, but for engagement. And I would like to get back to Debian work. Linux as a network device is a pretty special application. Usually we use Linux to run applications on it, and the networking code is right in the kernel. But it still needs to be configured. We have the classic network configuration where we put IP addresses on interfaces, have VLANs and tunnels and bridges, and we do IP routing. We do filtering. That's something most people call firewall, but a firewall is much more than just a filter. We have tunnels, we have VPN, we have more modern things like eVPN, VXLAN, software-defined networking. We have the classic stuff like DHCP, the Dynamic Host Confusion Protocol, and DNS. And of course, everything we need to do in IPv4 and IPv6. We have year 2023, so we should not be worrying about for 4 anymore. We should be using IPv6 all around the place, which we don't. But this is going to be an issue almost everywhere. Network configuration and routing can be done in Linux with those nice tools. In Debian, we still have EF up-down. Personally, myself is using systemd networkd since 3 years or so. That's a quite nice product, despite being from the systemd world. We have netplan and some derivatives of Debian, and we had WICD, which I really liked 10 years ago, but that's gone by now. Filtering is what got me personally started with Linux. My first Linux machine was a firewall for a small office. We had IPFW ADM back then, and then we had IP chains for a few years, and now we have iptables for 15 years. 15, I think, by now. It's still like write your firewall as a script, enjoy all the powers of scripting, and enjoy all the bugs of scripting. We have many high-level iptables helper tools that make this task a bit easier. My personal choice used to be Firm, but that's sadly abandoned upstream, and it uses iptables legacy, which makes it kind of clumsy to use on modern Linux systems. Since nftables came around, we have two iptables packages and we have two iptables binaries. One, the iptables that works with nftables, and an iptables legacy. Both can be installed and used concurrently, and that's a very, very nice source of fun. Not. In nftables, which is the new network filter framework that we have in Debian since Bullseye, and we have finally a configuration file. We have structure, we have order. This is really, really nice if it would be finished, but in my opinion, it is not quite finished. We have not much documentation. We have a wiki that is full of information that is not always up to date and not always complete. We, for example, do not have an IPv4, IPv6 combination notation, which I'm going to have a slide later. There is a bugzilla, and many bug reports rot away there for years without any reaction. So the idea that we could probably be following were to improve NFT, but that needs people who need to write, who can write parsers and C, and I'm not one of them. What we also don't have is a macro assembler like firm was for iptables. But I don't think that's necessary because NFT already has a powerful language that is just not fully finished. For example, this is firm. In firm, it used to be possible to have IPv6 and IPv4 addresses combined, written in any combination, and the firm parser and GRU generator is going to do the right thing of that. For example, this configuration is going to create two rules in iptables and two rules in IP6 tables, doing the right thing, ignoring the other family when creating rules for one protocol. This is something that NFT cannot do today, so we have to write entirely independent rule sets for IPv4 and IPv6, and those are bound to be not in sync, which causes for IPv4 not working, IPv6 working, or vice versa, which might be causing people to do the first thing that you do when the network doesn't work, meaning disable IPv6. And this is not what we want. Then there is DHCP. ISC has pulled the plug on the classic ISC DHCP package. The server has been replaced by KEA, which is rather more complicated than the DHCP server used to be. We have numerous replacements for the DHCP clients. We do not have a DHCP relay anymore that is supported, which is really bad if you are building a router based on Linux, because you need to have a DHCP relay on the router to be able to properly confuse your clients. DNS is an entire own can of worms, so we should probably have a session about that as well, but that's not a hard problem, I think. We may want to have some split horizon DNS. The more virtualized we are, the more we need that. DNS masks seems to be the tool that can do everything, but the fun begins when you do not want DNS mask to do some things that it can do. We also have bind, unbound, system to resolve, depower DNS, not DNS, whatever you want. I think Debian is pretty good in that regard. When we are trying to virtualize or to container things away, the host immediately becomes a network device. In the most easy way, it is just a bridge, but a bridge is a network device as well. The virtualization tools, be it libvirt, Docker, Kubernetes, etc., all require some special network setup, and most of those tools establish that network setup themselves, and if the system is not configured exactly like the tool is expecting it to be configured, fun begins. And most of those nifty hipster tools are like, what's that IPv6 anyway? We are doing RFC 1980 and everything is nutted or reverse proxies inside. libvirt, which is the tool used for real virtualization, used to have or still has an abstraction layer, which of course and unfortunately never really got off the block. It could do IP IF up down, but nothing much more. That was a nice approach, but it wasn't finished in time, unfortunately. That's what I wanted to say to tickle you, and now it's our job and your job to discuss. Does anybody have an opinion about those topics?
I have more a question. I saw that NetPlan thing. Do you think it's useful to make it the default in the near future, or are there still a lot of things that cannot be done with NetPlan but with the other configuration tools in Debian?
To be honest, I have not been looking at NetPlan quite seriously.
Okay. Anyone else?
I am kind of afraid that this is an application of the result if you Google XKCD competing standards.
Sure. Anyone else that knows something about NetPlan or is already using it?
I maintain it, but I don't. I used to maintain it, but I don't.
Mike, you need a mic.
Didn't have to give a microphone. I just wanted to say I introduced it in Debian and I used to maintain it, but never actually used it. So these days, the upstream maintainer maintains it in Debian as well, Lucas, I believe, and yeah. So there's nothing else I can say.
What do you people think about nftables? Was it a good thing to adopt it as a default?
Yes, I think it's the only sensible option to move forward with nftables, even for all its faults. I think it's a big improvement for filtering. I'm not sure I understood the combo notation for IPv4 and IPv6 issue that you mentioned. At least in terms of chains, there's no combination that you can use so that you don't have to have two different chains for v4 and v6. And I think it solved most of my issues with it.
Then I should probably retry that. When I tried it for the last time, this was wildly inconvenient combined to firm. But since I'm an old man,
yeah, I think it got better in the last few.
That
few
might
releases.
be caused by looking for reasons to not like it. But actually, I want to like it because it's a huge step in the right direction. Do we have any additional tooling that makes using NFT a bit easier, or is the NFT package the only thing that one should have installed when building an NFT firewall?
We did some testing with nftables, and I'm actually quite happy with the possibilities, because it's you can squeeze a very, very long list of iptables rules easily in something that is way more readable and easier to understand. The current state with the iptables legacy and iptables packages and nftables at the same time, it's kind of confusing, because you can easily create situations that are not easy to understand, depending on what iptables version is installed in parallel with nftables. In our case, we actually use it right now for kind of a workaround, because sometimes you use Docker, and Docker uses lots of iptables and is not very happy if anything else interferes with said iptables rules. And this is a way to work around it, because you may have nftables and iptables rules at the same time by using the correct combination of packages, but actually having two different sets of firewall rules is also very confusing because people forget that they need to check both. But it's a way to not break Docker while still maintaining firewall rules. But it's actually, I don't think it's a good solution. It's just a workaround.
And as far as I know, the execution order of iptables legacy, and NFT rules is undefined at the best.
It's confusing at best.
As far as I have seen from Docker, Docker is reasonably well behaved in iptables as it puts its rules into its own chains, and you can choose the point where to jump to those chains. So I have seen tools that behave worse with the filter rules.
The only problem we have is that we have large iptables sets, and long time ago we entirely moved to create those commit files that can be loaded in a split second, which is way better than having 9,000 rules of iptables being executed over a time of 5 minutes or something like that. But of course, the iptables, the commit files with the iptables restore command, they remove all existing rules, and there's no way to tell Docker to please recreate its rules. Once they're gone, and then Docker is screwed.
Ouch.
Yeah, but that's entirely an issue on the Docker end. So that's probably not something else should be fixing.
How are you building those huge iptable sets?
Does anyone know a GUI tool named Firewall Builder?
Yes.
We happily, finally migrated away from it last week. We started doing so when I started working at Zipgate, which was 2012. So we finally finished that migration, and we now have some in-house tooling that just generates iptables rules off from a, let's say, kind of firewall describing language. And this isn't the good solution as well, either because it doesn't support IPv6 and we need to move to somewhere else, but we wanted to have one single tool that generates iptables first and then move somewhere else instead of migrating from 3 different tools into something new. So if anyone knows a good solution to generate firewall rules for many, many hosts, maybe even of a single definition, I'm happy to hear about it.
Anybody?
There's an option with NixOS making flakes, and for each flake you can making a different configuration on your firewall, and each flake has a different container where you can define, and on this it can be easy. I can show you on the config if you want to. It's not different from you can make it on KVM, but it's much more complex, and I've never tried with KVM. But you can make it on if you have different applications, different services running. Maybe that's the solution. Otherwise, with KVM, you have to look at on other distributions which are also Nix-based, and these distributions are working on KVM. If you want to make more rules, a single firewall rule for each of these distributions.
Our use case is more, we have probably like 1,000 Debian-based machines, and some are like central firewalls forwarding traffic, and some are like local host firewalls. And we need to generate the rules for all of them. And usually, well, the easiest way would be to have like a single definition of these rules and not have just thousands of scripts. We should probably talk about that later.
I think we should move to the next topic. Does anybody have something to say about firewall, iptables, nftables anymore? So what do you think about DHCP? Where are we going there if we are managing clients and maybe even servers? How many people here in the room are running a DHCP server? Still using ISC DHCP? Well, okay, the DNS mask, of course, the one tool fits all solution.
I do not run that much DHCP server stuff, but I think What I heard about the new software solution, that not everything is possible, and I would guess we still have like 10 or more years that everyone will use ISC DHCP server, and if there's some problem in it, the community, I'm pretty sure, will fix it. So even there's no upstream support or no official support, since that many companies are other groups are using it, this will be maintained, and I do not see that it will be replaced in 2 or 3 years.
So you think that ISC DHCP is going to migrate into some mode of community security support of the community of its users? Does ISC still allow discussions about the legacy software on their mailing lists, or should we have a mailing list for that in the future to coordinate those efforts?
I think that's the nice thing about open source software. We can fork it, we can create another web domain or where we discuss things, so we are not depending on one company or on one organization.
Should we be the entity suggesting that to the community?
I think Debian can suggest a lot of things. The problem is who wants to do...
Who is going to follow?
or who wants to implement it.
So you are optimistic about the future of ISC DHCP despite ISC having pulled the plug. Okay. Do you think that's going to work with the relay and the client as well? I mean, the server is usually run by bigger installations who have the resources to do that, but the client is distributed among millions of users, so that's probably more work for the distributions.
No, it's not. As far as I understood, the client is still supported or done. It was only that the DHCP server, and maybe the relay was not. Huh?
I thought all of them recently. But
As far as I remember, but I might be wrong, they first announced end of life for the server and then set the entire suite to end of life like a year later.
Okay, yeah.
The release notes.
So the Debian release notes will have some information for us.
We have already briefly talked about network initializations because Thomas asked about NetPlan. What are you guys using for your network? Is probably if IF up-down is still the mainly used tool. Can you raise your hands if you're still using IF up-down? How about IF up-down NG? Systemd Network D? Network Manager? I think those are all relevant things.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned at all yet is NetCTL. It's mainly developed on Arch. Seems kind of dead upstream, and I think we should either remove it or make it work. It works somewhat for me, but it doesn't seem to apply patches.
Also, what haven't been mentioned is IWD for wireless configuration, which I like a lot.
Of course.
And which also does DHCP, but it can do so in combination with Systemd Network D as well, if you want.
We have also Conmand, which is also often used in IoT devices.
Okay.
Is if up down NG the same as if up down 2, or is because if up
Okay, then there is
was
also an if up down 2.
But that was the thing from Commodus Networks, right? If up down 2.
So there are basically there exist 4 implementations of if up down. There is the regional if up down, which is ifupdown. Then there is a cut-down version inside of BusyBox, which is the same code, just a very, very old version of it. Then there's unrelated re-implementation of ifupdown from scratch in Python, which is ifupdown 2. It was presented at DebConf in South Africa, if I remember correctly. And then there's ifupdown NG, which was developed, I think, about 3 years ago, from scratch by one of the main Alpine developers. And that was supposed to follow the best practices, basically, of C development these days and not from 20 years ago. And it also supports some advanced use cases that ifupdown doesn't support, but ifupdown 2 sort of tried to implement. So I think it's, of all implementations we have in Debian, it's probably the best one at the moment, probably.
I think that somebody mentioned ifupdown NG to me either today over lunch or somewhere on the stairs. Is that guy here? Okay. Do you want to mention something?
Andrew,
You need a mic. You need a mic.
Andrew explains all this stuff about ifupdown. I don't think I have something to do. ifupdown and G have better implementation of different dependencies with VPN and stuff like that.
That's important indeed.
So yeah, the problem is with the original ifupdown is that I don't think it's really developed these days. So I used to develop it back in the day when it was abandoned by the original author. Then I sort of lost interest at some point. Who's Sleeping picked it up and kept pushing it for some time, and then I guess he's also lost interest or something. And right now I don't know who actually cares about it, but it's sort of on live support right now. And ifupdown 2, the only benefit of it basically was that it was extensible in Python. Which also some people didn't like, obviously, because you don't want to have a Python 3 interpreter in a really, really minimal system, unless your result is in Python. But I don't think it did implement the dependency stuff. I think they tried doing that, but I'm not sure if they succeeded. And that's where I initially wanted to push the original ifupdown to. The general direction of that, and I think the NG one actually does it, and the ifupdown 2 does not.
I think if I remember correctly, one of the main advantages of ifupdown 2 was that it allows to soft reloads, and it's able to detect the state of your network and get from wherever it is to whatever you want it to be, which is something ifupdown usually doesn't do. Yeah. But that's at least the main thing I remember from seeing a presentation on it quite a while ago.
Thank you very much. This might be a stupid question, but do we have maybe in the wiki some kind of a feature matrix that compares all those nifty network initialization tools that we have in Debian, all different?
Ansible?
Yes, but Ansible is usually used to create the configuration files that some other tool then puts into the kernel. I mean, you cannot Ansible a system when it's not yet on the network. I am actually creating systemd network deconfiguration with Ansible, which works pretty nicely, because those systemd files are really, really nicely templatable.
Well, I mean, I would suggest that we use the reminder of today and tomorrow maybe to start compiling a list and just adding features from common knowledge, like the ability to, let's say, soft reload or the underlying language it's written in, etc. So at least we end up with a matrix by tomorrow night. That would probably be
sportlich.
We end up with a starting point of a list by tomorrow night.
Okay. That's nice. Any other topics that we should be discussing here? I still have some story to tell, so we are going to fill the time anyway, but I think it's more important to have discussion from the audience here. If you have anything to say, please do it.
I have one question maybe that was missing on the list of things that can be configured. Is anyone using VRFs?
Oh, of course, that was missing. Sure.
Because
I'm not using it, but it should be there.
We started doing so this year, and it feels like we're one of the few that actually do that, because there's not much tooling. You're able to work around the missing tooling, but has anyone using it? Linux devices? I see.
I think that's almost
faces.
as advanced like eVPN. Okay, then I'm going to use my last 5 minutes to tell you a story about a very important machine that I happen to be running for more than 20 years. This is the machine I'm chatting from, and that runs my mail services, and where almost everything comes together that I'm doing on the internet. That machine, of course, has IPv4 and IPv6, and it is an OpenVPN server that has many clients connecting to it. Actually, this notebook is a client to that machine at this moment. And dependencies are a very important topic there, because you boot up, you put IPv4 and IPv6 on the interfaces. Then you have to wait for the IPv6 addresses to become usable, because they stay in tentative state for a few seconds while duplicate address detection is running. And you must not start the OpenVPN server before not all IP addresses are usable, because the VPN server is probably not going to start if it's configured to listen only on certain IP addresses. Then the OpenVPN server configures its interface, puts IP addresses on them, which are going through tentative mode, because they have to do duplicate address detection. And then the mail server starts up. And I have, for legacy reasons, some clients that cannot do IMAP over SSL, so it has to be unencrypted, which is fine because it's a VPN link. So the unencrypted ports of Dovecot are only running on the VPN interfaces on that the OpenVPN server configures. So the Dovecot must not start before the OpenVPN isn't fully finished configuring. And figuring this out to have the dependencies in there, especially this tentative stuff, because that's something that system network still gets wrong. It considers an IP address usable as soon as it is configured, which is wrong for IPv6 addresses. So that was like, I think, 2 or 3 days of work until I had this working, because the machine is not, I do not have direct access to the console, so if I break something that the SSH doesn't come up, you have to fix it in the blind flight. And I think that the machine is never going to save as much booting time as I have spent human time to get into. So dependencies are vitally important if you have non-trivial network setups, and we do not have many tools that get this right. I'm definitely going to look into ifupdown.ng for those dependency stuff, because I find this very interesting. But this is something that most of our initialization tools are not good at. So if you happen to work on this topic, be aware that you cannot start up any network services, all network services in parallel, because some of them depend on each other, and those dependencies cannot be expressed with the classic stuff like we have a PID file, or we have or we have a process running. You have to look at the network configuration, and for me this meant like having systemd Unix, which with a one-line shell script in exec start, which then evolved to a real script or a real binary somewhere in /lib or somewhere else. that was not fun. We should be better in this direction. You need a mic.
Would it be easier to have a network daemon like Conman is, and which is managing it?
Systemd network D is a daemon. It keeps running after initialization, but I think it's still there is this some kind of strange mechanism that the systemd world has to determine whether a daemon is running or not. So it needs to be a modern daemon in systemd language to have this properly detected. And as far as I know, OpenVPN is not a modern daemon in this sense. I'm actually trying hard to not rant about systemd because I happen to like it, but this is something that also has some work to do.
We can use other daemons next to system besides systemd network D.
Personally, that's a level I wouldn't want to play. Having different daemons probably competing with each other with that opens so many possibilities of things to go wrong, and you need to spend to find out first which side is misbehaving. This is something, it might work, but I wouldn't like to try that. From my experience.
On my Debian server at home.
By all means, it could work. But, okay, conveniently time is running out. Thanks to all of you. It was a pleasure.
Yes, please show some hands for Marc. We'll go on a short coffee break, and in 10 minutes we'll be back with Paul, who talks to us about key packages. See you soon.